Well, hey everybody, welcome. Glad to have you with us today to talk about how to use your intuition on the bar exam. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Jackson Mummy, and for about 25 years I've been preparing students to successfully pass their bar exams all around the country. And I'm really delighted that you're with us today here on Facebook Live, or perhaps you're watching the video as we tape it and use it later, or maybe you're listening on a podcast. And whichever format that is, I'm glad that you've taken some time out to join me. If you are watching on Facebook Live today, I want to encourage you to type in your questions or comments as we're going through. I know that some of you will have some questions about this particular topic, and we want to make sure that we get a chance to answer some of those. I really want to respond to the questions that I typically get from people when we start talking about intuition, because intuition sounds very different than what you normally do when you're studying for a high-stakes test. In fact, most people that are studying for high-stakes tests would say, well, what I have to do is I have to memorize and study and know and then recite and create elements and do all of the steps and the flashcards and the other things that come along. And I understand that, but it's actually not a very effective strategy. And one of the interesting things that's happening right now is that there's more and more research that supports the notion that intuition is actually a better way to work and to function. And I'm going to share some of that research with you today. There's a new study that I'm really excited about that's very supportive of this particular methodology. And at the end of our discussion, I'm going to make a couple of suggestions, some practical things you can do to improve your intuition and ways that you can act on the bar. So for those of you that are coming online and want to know about this, again, I invite you to type your comments right there in the bottom on your Facebook post and let me know if you do have questions, and hopefully I'll be able to see them and be able to respond during our time together today. Well, let's talk about what intuition is, first of all, because I think sometimes this gets confusing to people. Intuition is not close your eyes, have no idea what's going on in the world. Intuition is not voodoo. It is not magic. Intuition is a neurological reality, and I think that you have to begin with that premise in mind. However, some people say, well, I have no intuitive sense at all. That's not true. We all have an intuitive sense. Maybe we're not sure about what car we should buy next, or where you should have gone to law school, or whether to take the bar exam, or what bar review course to select. All of those things would be intuitive decisions in some respect, and they should be intuitive about a variety of important decisions. And you would say, oh, I would never make an important decision without consulting all the details, all the facts, doing my due diligence. That's why you went to law school and you're a lawyer and so on. I get that. However, interestingly enough, research suggests that if you let your intuition make those decisions, you'd probably make better decisions. And there's a lot of evidence for that. But there is a brand new study that I want to point out to you that I really like. I like what they're doing. I like the result, obviously, that they're going to come up with. And then I want to show you how it relates to the bar. A study was done at the University of Rochester recently. And the conclusion of the study is that your brain is essentially hardwired to help you make the best decisions possible. But it's even more effective when you let the unconscious side decide. Now, that's important because on the bar exam, particularly the multi-state, most of you are inclined to let your conscious mind make the decision about the right answer. And that is precisely the wrong thing to do. Now, in order to dig in a little bit on this research at Rochester, Associate Professor of Brain and Cognitive Sciences, Alex Pouget, was trying to determine the brain's accuracy, and he set up an unconscious decision test. Now, this test involved a computer screen, and it had dots moving in random directions, all over the screen, kind of like when you're doing one of those eye tests. And a controlled number of the dots within that screen were actually set to move in uniformed, patterned directions, but not consciously observable, at least initially. Now, what the researchers did is they asked participants to watch the screen and to predict what direction the dots would move next. Would they move to the right, or would they move to the left? Sounds pretty simple. This was the interesting part. The longer that participants watched the dots, then of course the more aware they became of the patterns. And that should sound familiar to those of you doing the bar. The more questions you do, the more you become aware of the patterns. But here's what I loved. They were aware of the dots patterns even before they realized they were aware. This is the beauty of functional MRIs. We can tell so much more now. So what Pouget and his team did is that they analyzed the neuron patterns in the participants' brains. They had them wired up, and they were able to tell when their neurons were able to observe the parts of the brain that were tracking whether the left or the right movements would light up in accordance with the dots movement. So the dots are moving, then the person says, oh, I can see, yes, I can tell you now the dots are moving left or they're going to move right. Great, that's all good, that was all conscious. But the interesting stuff that was coming through the neurons was very different than that. What happened was that when they started tracking this, they found that the neurons were allowing participants to accurately calculate the next move way before, far before their conscious minds kicked in, at the point that they could confidently state their predictions as definite answers. In other words, before they could raise their hand and say, oh, it's moving this direction, the neurons in their unconscious or non-conscious brain knew that long before that. And that's interesting. Now, here's the implication. Your unconscious decision-making skills allow you to reach what we would describe as reasonable decisions in a comparatively small amount of time. That's what the researchers said. That's their conclusion. They then said, if you wait until you're 99% positive of an answer, of an approach, of anything, you waste time, and that's their words, not mine, you waste time accumulating unnecessary data before making a decision. Let me say that again. If you wait until you're 99% positive, you waste time accumulating unnecessary data before making a decision. Why? Because in your neuron patterns, in your brain, in your non-conscious brain, you've already figured it out. Okay. Now, what Pouget said was if you require only 51% certainty, so 1% more than half, and you trust your intuition, you can make decisions as effectively and in less time. That should get some of your attention, because if that's true, if you could make an MBE decision in less time and with greater effectiveness, greater accuracy, wouldn't you want to do that? I mean, I'm pretty sure that most of you would say yes. Now, how do you learn to trust your intuition? If that research is correct, and it follows a long line of research that suggests that intuition is better, when you do that, how do you get better at it? Well, you can use trial and error and practice. That's certainly one way to do it. But we've got a couple of suggestions for improving your intuitive skill. So let me go through those. Number one, if you are in our course and you are using photo reading, you have already begun to develop the skills and the skill set to be able to retrieve information intuitively. In other words, when you go to what we call the relax or the steady state, and I'm holding the tangerine back here for those of you that understand that. When you're in that steady state, you are actually able to retrieve information and to trust your intuition much more effectively. So one of the things that a photo reader is able to do better than someone else is to simply get themselves into that point of view where they're listening to the non-conscious brain and they're trusting it right from the beginning. That is definitely a great way to be able to improve your intuitive skill. Another way you can do it is a very simple technique of muscle testing, and I want to demonstrate this for you because it's so simple but so effective, and you can literally begin to learn to trust your intuitive skill just by looking at muscle testing. So here's our step, and for those of you that are listening on the podcast, I'll describe it, but for those of you watching, you can join along with me. The first step is you want to put your thumb and your index finger together to form a circle. So like OK, right? So thumb and index finger together to form a circle. Now the next step is you put your other index finger, see, right there, inside that circle, and you pull it apart right where the thumb and index finger match. So you're putting your other finger in and you're just trying to pull apart or break apart your thumb and index finger. Okay, now here, that's the test. Now, the way that we do this is at the point that you begin to pull, say the words, "Show me strong." Notice how hard it is to pull them apart. So go ahead and try it. Put your thumb and index finger together, put your index finger through the center, start to pull and say, "Show me strong." It's much harder to do. Now, Let's try it this way. Make the same circle of your thumb and index finger, put your finger in, and say, show me weak. Show me weak. Very easy to do. It's very easy to do. Okay, let's try it again. Make the same circle, put your finger in, put it in the middle, and now ask, and this will not work for some of you, but ask, is my name George? Very easy to pull your finger out if your name isn't George. Is my name George? Easy. But now ask about your name. Is my name Jackson? Much harder to pull apart. So by using your own name, much harder to pull apart. Now you'll notice the difference. You'll see that it's strong. Now this muscle testing that we're just doing is a great way to help you guide towards the best decision. So if you're in the exam and you're not sure of what to do, you can always do the, is it A? Is it B? Is it C? Can't get it. Is it D? It's a great way to test. And you may think, oh my God, they'll kick me out of the exam. No, it's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. It'll just freak out everybody around you. So that's a second way you can do it, is muscle testing. And if you're in our STAR program, Elena Ducharme, who works with us, has got a whole lot of those intuitive muscle memory tricks and techniques, and I invite you to talk with her about those. A third thing that you can do is to use a paraliminal from a company called Learning Strategies. And you've heard me talk about Learning Strategies. They developed photo reading that we use in the course, and they've developed a number of other tools and techniques that we like built on neuro-linguistic programming. They have a paraliminal called the Intuition Amplifier, and we're going to link to that in the show notes for the podcast, and we'll put it up here on Facebook later as well. And we're affiliates. I mean, I'm going to tell you that we'll probably make like 12 cents on each one of those CDs or downloads that you buy. It's not very expensive, but it's an incredibly powerful tool. It takes about 20-25 minutes. You play it on your device a few times, and it improves your intuition, your ability to follow your intuitive guidance. And I think that's a wonderful tool to be able to have. So if you've not used the Intuition Amplifier, really love it and would recommend it to you. I use it. I like it a great deal. Now, how does all this play out on the bar exam specifically? How do you use this intuition, this ability to think about and resolve problems? I've talked about this in other places, but I think as we're getting closer to the exam, it merits talking about again, certainly for the students in our course, but for anybody that's listening or watching. Here's the way I want you to do a multi-state question. I want you to read the question in its entirety consciously, slowly. Then I want you to read all four answer choices, A, B, C, and D, slowly and consciously. Okay, ready with me? Now, as soon as you've finished reading answer choice D, the fourth of the answer choices, I want you to make an immediate decision about what your answer is. A, B, C, or D. I don't want you going back. I don't want you thinking about it. I don't want you struggling to analyze it or eliminating wrong answers. I don't want you thinking about the elements or mnemonics or flashcards, any of those things. I want you to make an intuitive decision. And you say, I can't make an intuitive decision. I don't know. I've got to know it all. No, you don't. You actually do know it all. And you say, well, but I wasn't a photo reader, Jackson. I couldn't possibly. No, you do know it all. All of you are photo readers. We're all photo readers. It's just that you haven't learned the specific techniques. So the people who have been through photo reading do have an advantage, but you're all photo readers because everything you've read in your entire life and everything you've studied for the bar is all in your non-conscious brain. The problem is most of you are using your conscious brain. It's the part up here. It's the executive function, the prefrontal cortex. And truthfully, it can only hold a certain amount of information. Studies say between 4 and 11%, or 6 or 7 active ideas at one time. That's what goes into our prefrontal cortex. That's not very much information relative to the non-conscious brain, which is hundreds and hundreds of times greater and has more capacity. When you're using your intuition, that non-conscious brain is able to function, as you see in Pouget's study, faster, more effectively, more efficiently, and correctly than you can do through your prefrontal cortex. And so if you trust that and simply answer that question, you're going to see enormously successful results. Now, I couldn't figure out a way to do this technically, so it's going to be in the podcast, and the people in the podcast will hear it, and the rest of you today won't. But I had a great conversation with one of my students this week, in which she says, sort of out of the end of the conversation, oh, by the way, I was trying that intuition stuff you were telling me about, and I did my property questions. I did 30 questions, and I got 28 correct doing that. And you'll hear me gasp on it and go, you know, that's great. And then she says, so I think I'm going to do more of that. Do you think? And so one of the things I want you to do as you're practicing is that I want you to practice this approach. Over the next few weeks leading up to the exam, whenever you're doing a practice question, answer it just the way I described. Read the question, read the answer choices, make an instant decision. Then you can go back and review the answer explanation and see if your intuition was correct or not and why, and build on your substantive knowledge. Now, the advantage of doing that is that you're going to get practice at this idea of testing and taking tests intuitively rather than consciously, and it builds your confidence. I mean, I think the student that got 28 out of 30 correct is probably feeling pretty confident about her ability to intuitively answer questions, and it's less likely that she'll go back to a conscious study style once she's done that. But for some of you, letting go of your conscious studies is absolutely terrifying, and I don't want to diminish that or make fun of it or make light of it. I know it's a big deal, but if you'll let go of it, I know that you'll see a better result. And the best way to do that is in practice where there's absolutely no downside to getting a question wrong. If you miss a question at this stage, so what? I mean, it literally doesn't make any difference because you're going to go review the answer choice anyway. So why not do it and try it and see if it works and build that intuitive muscle, if you will, in your own brain. Listen to your ability to intuit the correct answer and then use that. And the more you do it, and the more it works, the more you listen, and the more you listen, the more it works. Right? I hope that makes sense to people. Now, I recognize that a fair number of you who are listening and watching will absolutely say, I will not do that. I am going to analyze and struggle and reduce answer questions, and I'm going to use all of these tools. And I'm going to say that many of you will not be successful, particularly on the MBE. The test really is tough. You know this. And many of you, particularly the people who do that kind of analysis, are going to have trouble getting 100 questions finished in 3 hours. But here's the interesting thing. When you answer questions intuitively, most of our students that do this finish those 100 questions in, ready, an hour and a half to 2 hours. Big difference, huge difference. When you don't have to struggle to get to the end, you know, the number of people who say, well, I had to guess on the last 5 questions or 10 questions, and by guess they mean they never even read the question, they just answered all letter A or whatever it was. You're putting yourself in a terrific hole. I mean, every question that you miss really hurts you at this particular level. So be absolutely certain that you are working all the way through and doing this intuitive style, and then I know this will shock some of you. Do not go back and change your answers. Don't change them. Don't figure them out. Don't go back and review them. Just get them on the sheet. Now, if you want to make sure that if you marked letter A on your test book, that letter A is on your Scantron, that's great. But that's the only change that you would make. It's the only time you would erase or do something differently. Now, let me wrap up by talking a moment about intuition on essay writing, because it also has a place there. In our course, you know that when we talk about intuition, what we're saying is that when you're writing and you're making arguments, the most effective way to write is to go on and literally start typing the law that would support the argument, not stopping to think about the rule or the element, not trying to memorize it, but just simply indicate what you're doing and what the law would be. That's intuitive writing, and it's intuitive writing that really enhances the quality of the law that you're using and makes it much easier to explain your reasoning and your rationale. I think that the number one concern that most people have when they're writing essays is, how do I get the essay written in time? And almost invariably, when I've got someone in that situation, I find that where the log jam is for them is that they write an argument and then they try to think of the law, which is very slow and very cumbersome and time consuming. This eliminates that problem entirely. Now, if you're not in our course and you belong to the the IRAC Society, and you believe that IRAC with its 30% pass rate is the way to go, I will tell you that it's very hard to go from an issue to your memorized rule, but at least I mean, at least be smart. If you're going to go out on the Flat Earth Society, at least take a boat that can get you off the end of the earth. And that boat, in our case, would be intuition. Write your issue, I guess, and then tell us what the law should say intuitively without trying to get up the memorized rule. And by the way, thanks. So I'm getting a lot of positive feedback here as I'm talking, and I appreciate that from all of you. And I think some of you are maybe laughing at my flat earth analogy. But nonetheless, for the IRACers out there, if you'll write intuitively, you'll find that even your crappy IRAC style gets better because you're able to move faster, and then I guess you can spot more issues if that's what you're trying to do. But back to my students, who I think are writing in a far superior way. When you're making arguments and then using your intuition about what the law would have to say, think about that. You're drawing on everything you know. Your life experience, your law school studies, your bar studies, your practice, if you've been in practice, all of those things. And that really gives you a huge advantage. So it's really an extraordinary tool that can make a huge difference. So why don't more people do it? Well, I think most people don't do it because they're just plain scared. It's so frightening to think, woohoo, hands up, right? I've got a 2-year-old granddaughter, and she does this thing when she doesn't want you to do something. She goes, no, 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 no. And I think that bar takers are a lot like 2-year-olds sometimes, in a lot of ways. And they go, no, 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 no. Don't take that away from me. Don't take away my ability to memorize and recite and learn all the elements and figure it out and eliminate the wrong answers. Don't take that away from me. And yet, I'm not really asking you to take anything away. I'm just asking you to use all the resources you've really got. You've got such an incredible resource in your brain, in your non-conscious brain, and most of you don't use it. Most of us don't use it. And if we could get you to use it, oh my gosh, what a difference it would make. Well, that's my thought about intuition. I hope that that's helpful to you. I hope that it makes sense to you. If you've got questions, type them in the Facebook group. I'm glad to answer them for you and try and respond. But I really want to make sure that you understand that this approach not only works in the laboratory, but it's worked in the bar exam. We have seen students improve their MBE scores by 5 points, 10 points, 15 points, 20 points, and more. And the only change that they made was to change from that conscious approach to an intuitive approach to study. I know everybody's busy. I know there's a lot going on. I'm getting some great comments from people. Thanks for all your notes and thumbs up and appreciations. I do hope that this is helpful to you. And if you want to know more about how to use intuition, how to use photo reading, how to use muscle memory, make sure you contact us and let us know. And for those who are not familiar with our approach to this, I want to invite you to join us on Thursday for our free live masterclass, How to Make the Next Bar Exam Your Last Bar Exam. We're going to talk about the 4 steps that you have to take in order to pass. These steps include knowing what's tested and not tested and how to use your intuition more effectively than you probably have. Look, this stuff can make such a difference for you if you'll just give it a chance. Just try it in practice and see what happens. And if you do that, I think you're going to be really excited about the results. Thanks to everybody. Enjoyed having you with us here today. Thanks for all the great feedback you've been giving me as we've been going on. We'll look forward to seeing all of you intuitively on the pass list soon. Bye for now.